What's up? Do you have problems? Have you had a lot of problems recently? Are you sick of problems? Do you wonder sometimes, like, why are there always problems? Well, today, look, this is the Existential Stoic Podcast. We're going to talk about why there are always problems. I'm Danny, here, buddy Randy. What's up, Randy?
Yo, Danny.
So, have you had any problems recently?
You know, it seems like they just won't leave me alone.
Right? Like, it's
Sometimes.
constant.
Yeah. It's like you get good at solving them and then more of them come. If it's not one thing, it's 12 others.
And you know what's funny? It's like we make a lot of problems for ourselves, and those like we solve sometimes and it feels good and whatever. But then like I feel like even when you feel like you're doing good, then an outside problem comes in too that you have no control over, and that like messes everything up. Like just when you think like whenever you think things are
Mm-hmm.
like smooth, the world's
Mm-hmm.
like, no, remember where you are and that you're alive.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I feel like there have been a couple times in my life where like everything lined up and all of my problems went away for like a day or two. And it
Yeah,
was
it's short.
bliss. And I was like, I finally got it. This is awesome. All the big things that I was working on, they all worked out. This is great. And then boom, something else.
Yeah, like an idiot. You're like, did I hit Nirvana? Am I enlightened? And then it's like,
Yeah,
no,
right?
no, you're not. Not even a little.
Not at all. Yeah. But it's a son of a gun because problems suck.
They do. And you know, the problem is like, well, here's the issue though, too. Are they bad? Because I mean, I think it's funny. We all hate problems, but at the same time, we also get a lot of value out of them. Like, I think, like, I'm thinking, like, when you're working on a project and you run into a difficulty and then you figure out how to solve it, that feels great, right? And you learn something and you overcome something. Or, like, even when something bad happens in the world, like, that you have no control over, but you deal with it, like, you prove to yourself that you can handle these situations and overcome this. And, like, there's also that view that like, the difficulties in life make like the pleasures in life even better because we have experience of both, right? But yeah, I don't know.
Hmm.
Do you think like should we avoid problems? Should we seek them? Should we deal with them differently? Are we
Oh,
just is life just
that's a
hard?
good question. Because like I would say we're both inveterate problem seekers. Like we've been self-educating forever, doing these challenging things. It's always cold and I don't know, rainy on this side of Everest or whatever that saying
Cold and
is.
dark on this side of everything.
Cold and dark on this side of Everest. Yeah, and
It
it's
is.
rainy too.
It is
Well, if
rainy
it's not
sometimes.
snowing, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's difficult because if I don't do that, I know for myself, but if I don't do that, I feel like I'm almost not contributing, not valuable, not
Yeah.
worthwhile.
Oh yeah, no, I know what you
Yeah.
mean. Yeah, if I don't have stuff to do and problems to solve, I feel like I'm totally lost.
Hmm. Dude,
Yeah.
like I still remember when I started working at like 14. That provided such tremendous like uh I maybe not value, but just like affirmation in my life that I was contributing. And I was washing dishes at a country club. I mean, this was nothing like
Yeah.
heroic where I was saving the world, but like I felt like I was really contributing. And my efforts were like being noted, like I was a good dishwasher. Like, oh my gosh, this is
Nice.
good.
Yeah, I remember that when I first started working too, because it feels good. You feel like you feel like you're independent a little bit, you're making money, and you're actually doing something that you've seen adults do, which is nice, right? Like it feels like you're at that point. Yeah, so no, I understand that. And I think you're
Mhm.
right though. We've both been like lifelong learners, so we've always been seeking problems out. I love problems too in a lot of ways. Like I like solving problems. They also suck. It's like this
Mhm.
weird thing where like I really like them, but I also dislike them. And then there's problems that are like, and I think there is a distinction between the problems we seek out because like we're learning or like, like I'm sure somebody who like, is a really good athlete or musician, like there's those difficult things that like they actually like because when they solve it, it's like that means they really like they leveled up, they're like better, they know how to do that thing now, whatever. And it feels really good. But then there's those other problems that like we don't choose that I think are also really difficult because we like you know, when we have a lot of problems in our life that we choose, all the ones we don't choose, like add just an extra layer of stress to everything.
When you were just describing that, it kind of made me think of problems like a roller coaster, how like at the bottom they really
Yeah.
suck, and then you're going up that thing, and it's like a lot of effort, and you hear it like click, 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 And then you get towards the top and you can like start to see over the edge and you're like, here we go, this is it. And it's starting to get good. And then you finally figure it out and the problem's going away. And the whole ride down is awesome. And then you get back down to the bottom and another problem's awaiting you.
Yeah. And the whole ride's about 45 seconds.
Yeah, right. After waiting for 3 hours. Yeah. Unfortunately, there's nothing you can do about problems. Like I remember we talked probably like 2 or 3 years ago. We talked about this story with the Buddha. I think it was like 89 problems or something like that. Some farmer, he came to the Buddha who heard he
Yeah.
heard the Buddha was an enlightened being. And he said to the Buddha, he's like, overall my life's pretty good. I have a great wife, but sometimes she nags me, and my kids are wonderful, but sometimes they won't do what I say. And I have this great farm, but sometimes the yield isn't as nice as I would like it to be. And he's like, can you fix my problems? And the Buddha said no. And he's like, what? And he's like, but you're the Buddha, you're an enlightened being, you're supposed to be able to do this stuff. And the Buddha's like, listen, I can't solve that problem, but I can stop you from having one more, trying to think that you'll have a life without problems.
Yeah. It's the truth though, right? And I like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good example too, because it's like I think we naturally look for ways to continuously improve our circumstances. I think that's part of the human condition, right? We create new things, we adapt very quickly, we build things, we constantly are looking for ways to improve something. And so we're constantly essentially looking for problems, identifying them, trying to make things better. And I think that's just like part of our life and part of what makes us feel like, we're making an impact on the world, like you said. And I think that is a big part of it, but they'll always be there. Like, because even things that are really good, there's going to be things about it we don't like. Like, I mean, like, I remember when I first started even teaching, like, I love teaching, but there's parts of the job I don't like. I'm sure everybody, even if you love your job, there's going to be aspects you don't like about it. There's going to be things
Mm-hmm.
that like annoy you, like maybe bureaucratical work or this or that, whatever. And it's like, so even things we love, there's going to be aspects that are difficult or hard to do. And so, they're always going to be there. And like we can try to improve it, but then we make new problems trying to improve it. It's
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
there was a
conundrum.
there was a definition that I saw the other day of heaven and hell, and it said heaven, this is nice, I could stay here forever. And then hell was, there's this one thing that's not perfect. And it's like, that's so true because it's like as soon as you figure out that one thing that's just not right, it's like that's hell. And
Yeah.
you can, and that's what problems are, is like this one thing is not perfect. And silly us, we focus all of our energy and effort on those things that aren't perfect.
Well, that might be the other way to look at it is like, maybe it's not, we can't be rid of problems, that's for sure. There's no way to get rid of them. It's part of life, but maybe it's our perspective on them that matters, like
Mm-hmm.
how I look at them. If we're always pursuing perfection, we're going to have lots of problems and they're going to be insurmountable. If we're like, if on the other hand, we're a little easier on ourselves, more realistic, right? We might solve some and not solve others, and that might be okay. And I think I've been trying to do that more myself, like look at things like, like the ones I can solve, it's a positive thing because I grow and it's good and I get to learn new things and stuff. But then there's going to be some that I just probably can't deal with or can't handle, and that's fine too. It's like, but I think maybe it is our perspective, this desire to like make things perfect, to make the world fit a certain design, even though it
Yeah.
doesn't. Yeah.
How do you deal with problems that just suck?
Yeah, it does suck, doesn't it? There's a lot of hard problems out there, you
There's
know?
some that are just so frustrating. And like I catch myself going down this thing because it's like I know this stuff that we're talking about. I know this stuff that it's just because I'm focusing on this stupid problem that it looks so terrible. Like clearly
Yeah.
there's a lot of other stuff in my life that's going great, but I'm focusing on this one little aspect and I blow it out of proportion and I go down this whole
Sure.
rabbit
Yeah.
hole. And yeah, so what does one do?
I don't know. It is tough, dude. I think, it's funny too, because I think like there's some problems that like maybe it is better just not to engage with them at all. To just let it go, let it be, walk by, so to say, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's others, it is tough though, because we always find them, we always make them, and like, some are just insurmountable. Like, like we're gonna die, right? Like that's a problem in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also part of life. It's also the way the world is. So I think that's where the acceptance comes in. Like some things we just have to accept for what they are, rather than looking at them as an issue to be fixed. Maybe
Mm,
that's it. I
yeah.
don't know.
Also trying to recognize the mind state that you're in. So like
Yeah.
we were talking earlier this week. I had a really bad back pain, and so I was feeling pretty terrible and in a pretty terrible mind state.
Naturally.
And so I was having this whole pity party for myself. And in my mind, I'm thinking, my life is terrible. Like 80% of the time it's terrible, and maybe 20% it's
I feel
okay.
crappy
And
all the time. I'm tired. Yeah, I do the same thing. I
and
know.
like now I'm feeling better. And I'm like, okay, fine, 50-50. But
Fine. I'll give you 30%. It's funny. It is funny though, dude, because I do the same thing where like it surprises me still how fast that transition is from my life's horrible, everything's gonna suck, this is how it's always gonna be to, oh, I feel fine. It's usually one night. That's usually what it takes. You know?
yeah.
Like I needed
Uh,
sleep. But like seriously though, it's funny because like, every time that happens, I'm always amazed because like I get understand, I'm like, oh, that's not the case. That was me just goofing around,
I was just dying.
pretending. Yeah.
Yeah, that's usually what it is. We're just a bunch of cranky babies. Either that or we're hungry.
Yeah.
Just eat something and go to sleep.
And I think a lot of times too, it's also like we're like, we have unreasonable expectations about reality.
Mm.
Like, that's the other problem too, I think, is we want reality to be a certain way, but it just isn't. And it's like, so that means I have to accept what isn't rather than fighting it, but we choose fighting it a lot. And like you said, our imagination, once it starts running wild, man, that is like our biggest enemy. It's like it can be so helpful and great, but also so detrimental. Because like that screws us up all the time when we start thinking about our lives, the future, and like, you know, yeah,
Dude, that's a huge one, our expectations. Because I keep getting trapped by this where I hold myself up to this unrealistic expectation of what I should be able to learn or know. Like
or
I keep
be,
getting
yeah,
frustrated. I'm not some freaking genius already. And as if it's just based on effort alone and not some type of crazy genetic freak accident.
yeah. Well, that's the other problem, right? I think we talked about this before, but I do think that's like probably tied to education too, like that, you know, we drill into kids that like, you gotta have A's, you have to be perfect, you have to be the best, like that you're validated only if you're at the very top. And I
I
think
wish we would start teaching that like these people that everyone looks up to are genetic freaks. You know,
yeah.
that would be a little bit easier to understand.
Well, yeah, because clearly not everyone's an Einstein, right? Like that was
No.
a random occurrence that allowed for an individual
And
like
like
that to work at a
Beethoven
patent
was writing
office.
symphonies at
Yeah.
like 5 years old.
Well, that's the thing. Those people will always occur randomly and sporadically, but most of us, it's not the case, and we have to put a lot of work in, and that's
Mm.
fine. But like, if we had, I think that's the other thing. If we have more reasonable expectations about reality and what to expect from it, we'd probably be better at dealing with problems because we wouldn't see
It,
all of them as, problems.
it's difficult to live an ordinary life. Like this, I get bored. I notice this coming up on a regular basis where it's like, okay, waking up, doing the same thing again today,
It's very
going
hard.
to eat and going
It
to work and coming home and going to sleep and doing it once again. All right. It's challenging to just live an ordinary life.
is. It's very hard. I think it's hard even if you're living, and that's the funny thing, 'cause even if you were living the extraordinary life, whatever the hell that is, that would be hard too.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean that would be and I think that's the funny thing. Like we also imagine in our heads that some other circumstance would be so much better. And the reality is
Yeah.
it probably wouldn't. But like, we're just used to what we're used to. So
I do like that in the newest Elon Musk book by Walter Isaacson, where some reporter asked Musk, "What would you say to the person who wants to be the next Elon Musk?" And he said, "Be careful what you wish for. It's not as fun as it looks."
yeah, it doesn't look fun, even from the outside. It looks terrible.
Yeah.
Dude, I read now because somebody was bitching about like, like the environmental impact of like private planes. They were talking about that, or whatever. But he took something like it was like almost 200 flights last year or something. Like, I mean, he has a private plane or whatever, so it's
Hmm.
quicker. But like, just think about how much travel that is. Like, I wouldn't even want to do that. I wouldn't want to get on a plane 200, even if it was my own goddamn plane, and
Hmm.
it was, I didn't have to deal with the security and all that. It's still, I don't want to do that,
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's what people don't think of. We look at these other people and we look at one aspect, like, oh, I want his money, I could do, and it's like, but it comes with all this other crap. Sleeping at Twitter because you bought it and it's a mess, like working 7 days a week, like that comes with that
Mm.
personality.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's this really interesting book that's on Oprah's book list called Bewilderment, and I'm reading it right
Who's that
now,
by?
and
That sounds familiar.
oh, I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
But so it's on her book list. It's called Bewilderment. And
I'll look it
but
up.
it's really interesting because it's about this autistic kid who does this neurofeedback type thing. And he ends up becoming somewhat enlightened to where he recognizes that like everything is one. And it's really interesting reading that book because now as I go around throughout the day, instead of seeing everything as the other, which I do 100% of the time. Now I do it 99.9% of the time. And that
Nice.
0.01% of the time, I
You're enlightened.
see I see other as me. So like when I see the couple who's being all romantic and I'm single and lonely, I can still be like, oh, there's love in the world. Like as opposed to
Yeah, yeah.
just being some jealous whatever. So
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting because it changes perspective on all that
Perspective
stuff.
does matter. It is weird that all things are connected when you think about it. We do think of things as being very distinct and separate, but they're not.
Hmm.
I always think about that. Just think of the air you breathe.
Mm.
It's
Ew,
touching everything else.
gross.
I know, gross, right? The trees, the bugs, some
You're
chipmunk
breathing
probably
people's
breathed it.
farts.
Yeah, everything, everything. It is funny. But yeah, it is all connected. And I think perspective, though, that's a good point. Like perspective matters. Like if you can switch your perspective, you can look at these things a lot differently and maybe in a better way. It's hard
Hmm.
though. It is hard. Because
Yeah.
the other thing is when you're in a problem, all that goes away. Like especially when it's a really big problem, like you lose all the resources you had to deal with things gone. Like just gone.
I'm so blown away listening to our old podcast, especially when it's relevant to what I'm going through, because I listen to it and all of that reasoning, all of that logic is
Gone.
just completely gone in the moment. And then I'm listening, I'm like, how did I know this?
Yeah. Dude, I get that feeling all the time. And like it's like, so I did know what to do, I just didn't do it, or I just didn't have access to it. And our brains are very
Hmm.
weird, yeah. And it's like
Hmm.
we're very good at like blocking things out when we're stressed in a difficult situation.
Hmm.
It's like we're unable to like I think that's part of it, just taking a step back too when we face these problems and giving ourselves a chance to like instead of immediately trying to tackle it, like giving ourselves a chance to like think it through. Because I do that with I do that with work a lot where like I'm learning something, I get stuck. And instead of just banging my head against the wall, I leave it alone for an hour or two or a day. And then usually it solves itself. Like your brain works it
Hmm.
out. And if we did that more with other stuff, we'd probably be a lot better off.
Probably. Yeah.
Not that we're going to, but like if we did,
Yeah. Just take a vacation from your problems.
yeah, it's to leave it for tomorrow, as they say,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, because listen, we're going to die with problems.
yeah,
And the world's still gonna continue turning. Like that's the thing that
yeah.
gets me all the time is I think if I solve all my problems by the time I die, then I succeed. But it's not true because there's still just gonna be the world
You're
turning and
dead.
problems
You'll
and all
still
this
be
stuff
dead.
going
Yeah.
on. Yeah.
Yeah, it is funny. We also convince ourselves that, right? That somehow if we fix all these things, somehow we'll be at a point where there won't be anything, like problems
I
or
win.
anything. And it's like, yeah, you win. But it's like, no, there's still going to be all that crap. You're not going to get away from that. It's still going to exist. And even when you do solve everything, there's still problems. Even if it's
Mhm.
only the problem of what do I do now?
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
Yeah.
it is funny.
Yeah. So trying to slow down and be okay with just problems and having them and yeah,
No, it
I
always
guess.
sucks, right? What a terrible response.
I guess. That's
Ex
one thing that I've been working on because like I always felt like being very efficient at dealing with problems was good, but then that just gives you more problems to deal with.
yeah, if you slow down, you have less of them.
Yeah.
You're not forced to find out new ones.
And then you don't have to be stressed about being all rushed.
Yeah, I've been trying to just be easier on myself, take a step back, look at things like, give myself space and distance from things before
Mm.
I try to address them. That's been very helpful. And also just
Hmm.
accepting the fact that like no matter what I do, there's gonna be problems. No matter what I do, things are gonna happen that I can't, like even if everything goes perfect, there could be a storm where there's flooding and then your basement floods. You know what I mean? Like that you had no
Hmm.
control over. And that's just
Right.
life. Yeah,
Bingo.
there you have it.
That's why there's still problems.
That's why there's still problems. That's why there'll always be problems. And hopefully that helps you figure out what to do with them. Maybe. I don't know. But hey, if you like this episode, this is the Existential Stoic Podcast. Check us out on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Please like, share, subscribe. It helps us out a lot. We'll be back later this week with a quick fix. Until then, though, later.
Later, Danny.